I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be looking at two videos. The first one, the one you're watching today, is the best cinematography predictions, and then a couple days later on Wednesday, I'm going to be giving my predictions on the best animated feature category. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is pick a category and break it down, what I think is going to get nominated for the 2022 Oscar nominations. And then once we get those, we're eventually going to predict what I think is going to win the best categories for the Oscars. But that's all the way in March. So I decided to break down the categories and give you a deep insight into all of the possible nominees, but also what I think is going to get nominated. We've been having a blast so far of this series. You guys have been showing a lot of support. We've been doing the breakdowns, but also sort of analysis of things like Critics' Choice and Golden Globes, and essentially just using this channel as a way to totally break down and analyze the Oscars. But this week, we're going to be looking at the best cinematography category, which is an interesting category, similar to other years in the sense that it has newcomers, but also some old staples, some best picture winners, but also some sort of possible contenders. There's going to be a lot of sort of interesting analysis, and I've picked some historical, statistical stuff that I think will be very helpful in helping you ultimately come up with your predictions what's going to get nominated. So just jumping into it, my first nomination for best cinematography is going to be Dune.
There's only awakening in my mind.
You need to face your fears.
Come with me.
This is from cinematographer Greg Fraser, who has been nominated in the past for Lion, but he's also done Rogue One and a couple other movies. And more importantly, I think why this is in the sort of top slot is from the director. Now, the cinematographer-director relationship is very sort of close and tight-knit, but also when it comes to the nominations, oftentimes the director's style can help the cinematographer get nominated. Just by looking at someone like Denis Villeneuve. His last 4 movies have been nominated for best cinematography. Now, he's had great cinematographers like Roger Deakins, and this is the first time working with Greg Fraser, but just from the fact that Denis Villeneuve's past 4 movies have been nominated for best cinematography, I think really helps Dune's chances. Because what does it tell us? It tells us that this guy, this director, likes to have this huge kind of landscapes, that he really has an attention to detail, and Dune's the same way. A lot of people saw it in the theater, in that sort of IMAX experience, and I saw it that way, and it's really an overwhelming kind of a visual sensation. James Cameron's talking to Denis on Variety and doing series, and he's claiming it to be sort of like a Lawrence of Arabia type epic, and it really does feel like that in these sort of long landscapes and intimate close-ups, and just how the story is told. There's sort of a gritty realism, taking this sort of sci-fi epic and bringing it and grounding it down, which I think a lot of people really resonated to. A lot of people did see it in the theaters based on its box office success, but a lot of people also saw it on HBO Max. We expect this movie to be a Best Picture nomination. It's getting a lot of precursors. We think Denis Villeneuve is going to get in for director because there's a lot of technical love and appreciation for the movie. One of the main technical categories is best cinematography. So we got a past nominee. We got a director whose past 4 movies have been nominated for best cinematography. We got a movie that's a sci-fi epic that's claimed and respected by all these great directors, and it's a movie that really is this sort of grand movie theater experience. And I think that Dune, just based on the factor that it's a strong, we think, Best Picture contender with director, the sort of pedigree of some of the past of Denis movies, but also of Greg Fraser himself, I think Dune is going to get in. Then my second nomination is going to go to West Side Story.
No one will ever forgive you.
This is from past nominee Janusz Kaminski, and actually past 2-time winner Janusz Kaminski, who is Spielberg's right-hand man and once again delivers a really terrific movie. In later years, there's been some criticism over sort of his typical pooling of light and almost artificial use of his cinematography. However, I think that actually really lends itself very well here. This is West Side Story based on the musical, and it's set in New York, but it's not necessarily like a Taxi Driver, gritty, realistic kind of a New York. It's a heightened New York. It's almost like a musical type New York, and I think that works for that. That's where that some of that artificial lighting and digital backgrounds and the sort of pools of light, the more stylistic approach that he takes, I think actually works and heightens and adds to the experience and is the correct stylistic choice for this movie. And then because it's a musical, even though this is Steven Spielberg's first time, it really does feel like he knows how to move the camera. I mean, he's the best in the world at doing that, and Janusz Kaminski sort of works really well with him in doing that. So the camera's always moving, it's flashy, it's noticeable, which always helps for best cinematography. cinematography categories. You know, you don't want something to get rarely something gets nominated that's very sort of traditional shot, reverse shot, nothing really flashy. Oftentimes the flashy movies get nominated for best cinematography, and this is one of them. The camera's always moving. There's beautiful colors, even the way they light some of the jets versus the sharks, they're similar, and you sort of get confused between the two, which I think was sort of a smart storytelling intentional choice. So you have beautiful colors, camera's always moving. There's one shot of a puddle, which is one of the best shots of the year, which is kind of a strange thing to say, but it's one of these things where Janusz Kaminski has won twice, so we expect West Side Story to be a well-nominated movie, and this is just someone that is very well respected and can do stuff like make a puddle shot one of the best shots of the year, just make these sort of mundane shots so electric, so exciting. I think for a lot of people, you know, I saw the movie with my mom, and one of the very first things she said was, wow, the visuals were so terrific, and she's no cinephile, so I think that for a lot of people, they will sort of appreciate that visual element. So we have the movie, which I do expect to maybe even win Best Picture. I do expect it to get a lot of nominations. Steven Spielberg, acting, you know, even writing. So I do expect it to get a lot of technical love too, whether it be costumes, production design. From a past two-time winner, I think West Side Story is almost a lock to get nominated here. Then in my third slot, I went with The Power of the Dog.
You are marvelous, Rose. We were married someday.
Now this is from newcomer Ari Wagner, who is really an exciting young cinematographer. She's done Zola and True Story of the Kelly Gang, and she did Lady Macbeth. So she's sort of coming up and doing a lot of really interesting work. And here I think it's probably her best work, working with Jane Campion in this her sort of signature style of these sort of painterly compositions and taking the time on frames and slow moving kind of pans. It really helps to accentuate the sort of tension and build that throughout the movie. So The Power of the Dog, you know, this is from Ari Wagner, who is a first-time nominee, which you may say, oh, that's a little bit unsure, because a lot of these technical categories, they'd like to nominate people who they nominated before. But I did a little historical digging, and I looked at the past 10 years of the Best Cinematography nominees, and I wanted to look who was getting nominated for the very first time, who are these first-time nominees, and I calculated them all up, and an average of 1.9 first-time nominees get nominated every year. So essentially, 2 of the 5 slots go to first-time nominees, and if you look at my predictions, it's exactly the same. And I think you should consider that when you're looking at your nominations. Have they all been nominated before? Have there been 4 new nominees? Things like that are important, because in these technical categories, they like to reward the sort of staple guys, the Bruno Delbonnels, the Roger Deakins, the Janusz Kaminskis. But they also like to sort of reward the up-and-comers, the new people, you know, someone like Linus Sandgren could win for La La Land, Jaron Blanche can get nominated for The Lighthouse. So these sort of more interesting cinematographers and up-and-coming young cinematographers do get recognized, and I think this is a perfect situation here for Ari. You have The Power of the Dog, which once again I do think is going to be a very well-liked movie, maybe have the most nominations both in above the line but also in the technical element. I think it's important, like I said, with the director relationship. Jane Campion, her last big Oscar movie, The Piano, was nominated for Best Cinematography because of just her style of these sort of more patient framings. I think is a little bit more noticeable and really helps to build that tension, and I do think will be appreciated even in terms of sort of the frames within the frames, looking through windows, sort of that obstruction of that dead space is really interesting use of it here. Now, it's not necessarily totally flashy, and the movie is going to be seen by most people on Netflix, which I think will hurt its chances in terms of really noticing that cinematography. It's much easier to sort of appreciate it, seeing it on the big screen, but I do think just the overall sort of critical love we're already seeing for The Power of the Dog will resonate with the Academy, and I think that Ari gets in here, and that the fact that she's a newcomer I actually think probably benefits her in this case. Then my 4th nomination, I think it's going to go to The Tragedy of Macbeth.
By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes.
Now this is from 5-time nominee Bruno Delbonnel, who is a very well-respected cinematographer within this industry, coming from a movie that allows him to sort of accentuate his visuals. This is a guy who's been nominated for movies that he's been the movie's only nomination. I mean, he got nominated for a Harry Potter movie, in which that movie got no other nominations except for cinematography. He got nominated a couple times like that before, but more recently has been nominated working with the Coen brothers. Now this is only Joel Coen, not Ethan, but still, I think it will be appreciated by the Academy. This is a movie that hasn't been doing so well with the critics and the Golden Globes, a little bit underperforming there. However, I do think even in both those cases, it got in for cinematography and it got in for Denzel Washington for actor. So there is still, at the very least, even if this movie underperforms, I still think people will appreciate the cinematography because it's from a five-time nominee who is very well respected within the industry. And also, it's a black and white movie. And that's a really key distinction because for the past 3 years in a row now, we've had black and white movies get nominated. And you could even go past throughout the years in the 2010s, whether it be The Artist or Nebraska, black and white movies, when they're in the contention or being seen, do get nominated. I mean, it really does help to have your movie black and white because a movie like The Artist doesn't necessarily have spectacular cinematography, but it's in black and white and the movie was well liked, so it got nominated. So if your movie's in black and white and you're a Best Picture contender, or even in the conversation, I think that helps. So that's one side of the black and white. But also, the other side is something like The Lighthouse, a movie that was sort of in the conversation, but only got one nomination, and that was for cinematography. So you could be a smaller indie movie that's shot in black and white and still get nominated. That just shows you the fact that both the Best Picture winner that doesn't have flashy cinematography can still get in, and then also sort of the independent movie can still get in for cinematography, just because it's in black and white, and because we know the cinematographers group really and branch really appreciates the differing sides, that they still appreciate black and white as its own kind of unique style. And I think The Tragedy of Macbeth, not only is it shot in black and white, similarly to The Lighthouse, it's shot in this 4:3 Academy ratio, so it's like this boxy ratio. Once again, another stylistic choice that I think will be appreciated. And we haven't seen sort of a lot of people who have actually seen the movie, but we have some initial first reactions, and also we have those 2 trailers, and just by looking at the trailers, there seems to be a heavy emphasis on the visuals, sparse production design, really kind of avant-garde-esque chiaroscuro lighting. Very interesting approach. So you have a past-time, 5-time nominee who's very well respected, who gets nominated for movies even if they're not very well liked. We have a black and white cinematography. We have a unique aspect ratio, so heavy stylism. And I also do think this movie will be at least in the conversation, if not for Best Picture. I do think it's going to be actor, maybe writing too. So it's still in the conversation, still from people that are, talent that is very well liked. I think Bruno gets in. And then transitioning now into my 5th pick, I'm going to go with Belfast.
To cleanse the community a wee bit.
You wouldn't want to be the odd man out in the street.
Touch my family and I'll kill you.
Are we gonna have to leave Belfast?
We'll fight this together.
This is it? This is what?
This is war.
And it's for similar reasons to The Tragedy of Macbeth or almost The Power of the Dog. First of all, I think Belfast is the frontrunner to win for Best Picture. It has all the elements of a coming-of-age tale, of being serious and personal, but ultimately triumphant in the end and heartwarming, and it's got a potential sort of a lot of acting nominations. So there's a lot of sort of these things that are lining up for that movie. So when you look at the past Best Picture winners, 6 out of the last 10 have been nominated for Best Cinematography, which I do think is interesting, that not all the time do we see the Best Picture winner get nominated for cinematography, but about half the time, a little bit more than half the time. So if we do think Belfast is a really strong frontrunner, well then we should consider it for this kind of final slot. I also sort of liken the movie to something like The King's Speech, because many times it has this kind of off-kilter, unique framing, putting heads in certain corners rather than the traditional sort of center of the frame, so there's a unique sort of element to that. Fisheye kind of type lenses, really wide, not necessarily fisheye, but really just wider lenses. Of course, the movie is also shot in black and white, as I just mentioned with The Tragedy of Macbeth. Being shot in black and white really helps. I mean, we're seeing a lot of movies shot this year. Something like Passing is not a possible contender, but could be just because it's shot in black and white, although that movie has been sort of disappointing and really only connecting with the critics. But this movie, I do think, will get nominated for Best Picture. I do think we'll have a lot of nominations. I think it's the front runner to win Best Picture. This is from a newcomer as well, but I don't think that will necessarily matter. And if anything helps, like I mentioned, because usually there's 2 per year, so this will be the second in this case. So we have a strong movie. I'm banking off that. I'm banking off the black and white. I'm banking it off of sort of the interesting stylistic wide-angle lenses that's being used, so that at least it's not sort of totally boring. It is kind of an interesting approach to that, although it is in the 5th slot just because it doesn't have necessarily super flashy from an unknown cinematographer. A couple of those things don't help. Now jumping into my honorable mentions, my first one's going to be Nightmare Alley.
Lost in threat, they got us all walking on this earth, but gone wrong somehow in maternal womb. Not fit for living.
Now this is from cinematographer Dan Lawston, who has been nominated before for The Shape of Water, the Best Picture winner. And in that movie, he does a really brilliant job at sort of greens and blues. But in this movie, it's very much a noir-esque movie. So lots of blacks, lots of kind of oranges and reds. And I think the movie is really beautiful. I saw it the other day and I was really impressed by the movie. And I think that for the most part, if it's not maybe a Best Picture contender, I do think it will get a lot of the technical awards and appreciation. But right now it's on the outside because it didn't have sort of certain signature shots. I mean, there is sort of a noir-esque, beautiful lighting kind of an aspect to it, but its recent disappointment at the Golden Globes and Critics' Choice have me questioning it overall as a movie. It has Dan Laustin, but unlike something like The Tragedy of Macbeth, you know, that has Brune Delbonnel, who's been nominated 5 times. Dan has only been nominated once. So he's sort of a little bit more of he's an established cinematographer, but he hasn't been as well appreciated as someone like a Brune Delbonnel. So that keeps me on the outside. Nightmare Alley doesn't have necessarily maybe the support and love that we think it's going to have. Also, this is a movie that I've also seen complaints about, seeing that it's almost too dark in certain showings and it's hard to see, which could be sort of a negative if other people feel that way. I didn't. I thought it was a really beautifully shot movie, but right now it's on the outside purely because of the strength of the film, because of the strength of the cinematographers. However, it is a serious contender because of that sort of noir-esque kind of approach to the lighting and even just how Cate Blanchett is shot, and kind of the more the story evolves and goes down the path is very interesting. And then my final honorable mention is going to be Spencer.
They know everything.
This is from...
They don't.
Mummy, what's happened to make you so sad?
Well, here, in this house, there is no future. Past and the present are the same thing.
This is from cinematographer Claire Mathon, who is a really interesting cinematographer and up-and-coming, similar to someone like Ari Wagner. And I think, you know, she'll be someone that will be talked about for years to come, and she has a real talent and a real eye, especially in Spencer. This was one of my favorite shot movies of the year. The reason why it's on the outside is just because I think the movie hasn't been resonating as much. It sort of has fallen out of the Best Picture contender race. Even someone like Pablo Larraín out of director. It seems to be Kristen Stewart is still going to be the sort of Best Lead Actress winner, but it could, like I sort of predicted right at the beginning, I think Spencer's going to be a similar trajectory as something like Jackie. Get a costumes, get an actress, but that's it. So there is some interesting stylistic elements. I mean, Spencer's shot on a 1:6:6 ratio, so it's a little bit of unique aspect ratio. Shot on 16mm and 35mm, so it has this sort of really filmic look, very sort of pastel color palette too. Very interesting visual choices. Like I said, one of my favorite visual movies of the year. However, I'm really, even more so than Nightmare Alley, concerned about the success of the movie ultimately. And I think when we're deciding on that 5th slot, I'm going to go with the black and white movie that I think could maybe win Best Picture, rather than the movie that may only get 2 nominations. So that's kind of the thinking behind it, although it does have some interesting distinctual visuals and could get in. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on cinematography, and stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel so that when Wednesday's videos is uploaded right after the Annie Awards, I'm going to give my analysis and thoughts on the animated category. And then once again, we're going to go back into sort of the traditional Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time upload schedule. But that's about it, guys. Until next time, stay tuned.